afternoon, good evening, good morning, depending on where you are in the world. Thank you so much for joining in for a panel of experts to discuss slowing down to speed up, science-backed tips to prevent injury. I'm Jonathan. I'm a podcast host, runner, cyclist, and longtime team member over at InsideTracker, and I'm proud to be moderating this panel with 4 doctors here. So I feel like there should be a telehealth joke made, but we're going to skip that for now, and we're going to dive right into it. So thank you everyone for joining. This podcast, this webinar will be recorded. We'll be replaying it on IGTV and YouTube. So if you tune in or if you need to leave, it will be available recorded later. So we're going to roll right into the first intro and first question. I'm going to ask Dr. Andrew Moran the first question, and after a little intro, and then everybody's going to answer, and we'll do the same with everyone else going forward. So first, Andrew is a husband, father of 1 and soon to be 2 in Minnesota. He's a doctor of physical therapy and run coach. He enjoys being a resource for runners and working alongside runners to get back to feeling strong, confident, and on the road to training consistently for meaningful performance. Andrew, thanks so much for joining us. And the first question is, why do you love running, and what keeps you going when challenges arise?
Yeah, that's a good question. Just first and foremost, thanks for having us. And if you're catching this one, this will be a really good one. I'm just amazed at the panel here. So this will be definitely one to come back to and circle to. So thanks for having me. As far as, why I love running and some of that, I think there's something contagious about it. I think a lot of us can sort of think back in terms of when it was that we sort of got the itch, right? And sort of got the bug. And I feel like just talking with a handful of runners in clinic and sort of just engaging in the social running community, it's a common theme. And I think it's sort of this constant sort of reveling in the process and striving towards somewhat of a common goal that really is infectious. So, I think a little bit of my story is very similar and hand in hand with that, where, I didn't grow up being a runner. As a matter of fact, I couldn't stand running, which I'm sure maybe some can relate to, being more of a team sports athlete. Yep, I saw that hand go up, Jonathan. Love it. And so I think it's something where as life circumstances change and that competitive itch still is there after sports and after team sports kind of have their way throughout your life. That's sort of a really fun transition to make and a way to continue to challenge yourself. So and I think the second part of your question was injury, a tough injury that I've dealt with. Is that what you mentioned?
What keeps you going when challenges arise?
When challenges arise. Okay. Yeah, I think for me, it sort of goes back to that initial how I got into it, right? It's as challenges arise, because they do, I feel like I find myself coming back to that phrasing of when curveballs are thrown, right? And when kind of the waves of life are kind of tending to toss you. I feel like in those moments, it's helpful really to come back to, okay, why do I do this? What is my purpose behind it? And I think for me, that really goes down to kind of the core of my being, right? It's sort of, I want to be someone who's active and can kind of stay dialed in consistently with representing a good example for, I think, first and foremost, my family, right? But then this is something I want to be doing for a long, long time. And so I think that sort of core tenet really is a driving force for me, and I know also for many. And I think it's just fun too, in sort of a sick, twisted way. I think we all will maybe.
We all love our type 2 fun.
A little bit, right? A little. I think I have a screw loose at times, but I'm quickly reminded that I'm not alone. So, I think maybe a glutton for punishment in certain areas, but also it's sort of that after you finish the run, there's just such a good feeling of accomplishment. So.
Very cool. So as mentioned, we're going to go around the horn on answering each question. We'll do intros with each new question going forward. So next up is Dr. Emily Kraus. Same question to you. Why do you love running and what keeps you going?
Thanks, Jonathan. I feel like Andrew did a really good and thorough job, and I think there probably will be a lot of overlap as far as our love and passion for running. I would say that why I love running and kind of how I got into it. I started running when I was in high school, kind of went through it, played a lot of different sports, and then really found that running on the golf course was more fun than playing golf, to my parents' dismay. And so I joined the cross country team. And I would say really when running kind of connected with me the most was during med school and even through college. It was my escape, my way to cope with a stressful exam or to run away from the organic chemistry lab final that was around the corner. And through that, I realized that that physical activity and that movement really was something that I wanted to keep in my life. And I think what really keeps me going now, especially when challenges arise, is that the community that I found through running, and I some of my closest friends I've met through the running community. And even on those days when maybe my mileage is a little bit lower or I might not feel as motivated, the accountability through friends and those experiences and those shared moments in the dark, in the early morning hours, or on those long runs when you're suffering and hangry. I think there is just a lot of value in the running community, and that really keeps me going and makes me appreciate the sport in a really different way than when I first got into it.
That makes sense. Next up is going to be Dr. Megan Roche. Megan, same question. Why do you love it?
Yeah, I think for me, +1 on all of those points. So I actually got into this as a field hockey player in college. I loved the feeling of being on the start line and being like, it's wind sprint time, like it's time to be competitive, and just absolutely loved that feeling. So walked onto the college track team and just loved competing. And then I think for me, ultimately, it really comes down to just a love for being out in nature and being outside. So this back here is a trail that I ran this weekend, and it was like unbelievably magical out there, and just feeling like a big connection to trails and nature during that time. But I would say like I've had some runs at 4 a.m. doing 20 loops around a Walmart parking lot because that's like the only place I can squeeze it in, and just like appreciating being outside during that time too. And then in terms of what keeps me going, I think one, very much a lot of coffee and working to dial that back a little bit thanks to InsideTracker's help. And then also too, I'm a coach, and I think I see a lot of the experiences, like a lot of the challenges that I've had in running echoed across my athletes. And I think for me that normalizes it, but it also creates this like sense of shared community, and I get to live vicariously through my athletes' performances too, which is awesome.
Very cool. Dr. Stephanie Howe is up next. Stephanie, what does it for you? Why do you love running, and what keeps you going when the challenges arise, as they inevitably do?
Yeah, well, Andrew, I'm from Minnesota. I don't know if you knew that, but grew up in Minnesota, and I hated running when I was younger. I was good at it, but I just didn't want to do it. And I think as I grew older, you learn to love what you're good at. And so it's just a natural transition for me, and similar to all of you going through grad school, I had very limited time. And so running was like the most bang for my buck. You could get a run in 30 minutes and feel like good afterwards. And I'm an introvert, so I see running as my time alone. I don't run with music, and I rarely run with other people. And I love to be out in the mountains. So it's like my time to be with myself. And I like when I don't get that regularly, I just get all in my head. So it's really important for just my mental health and just state of being calm and not an anxious person. And I think what keeps me going is just my desire to move. And our bodies are made to be stressed. And I mean, when we run and push ourselves, it doesn't necessarily feel good, but the after part, like when we get through that, all the hard work, and we're like, yeah, like I just, accomplished that. That's such a good feeling. And I think ultimately that's what keeps me going. That and the idea of croissants in a refugio in the Alps.
You and your mountains in out near UTMB. Love them, right? Your point on the post-run feeling. Megan was talking about this on her podcast recently, where you earn these good days, and it feels so good that you can work towards something and feel so amazing, but you can't get up tomorrow and decide to run 25 miles through the Continental Divide and expect to feel good. That's years in the making. I think that's why I love it. It's the continuous leveling up and ability to improve what feels good and feels normal and just keep on going. So as we move along here, I'm going to introduce Emily again. Dr. Emily Kraus is the clinical assistant professor at Stanford Children's Orthopedic and Sports Medicine Center. She's board certified in physical medicine and rehab, and takes a unique approach to diagnosis, treatment, and prevention of sports injuries. She serves as the director of the Stanford Female Athlete Program, focused on female-specific translational research to answer fundamental physiological and sports performance questions important to improving the health and performance of girls and women, including very important topics like bone health, female athlete triad, Red S, running biomechanics, and a ton more. So translational science, translational research, what that means is she's helping athletes get better and translating science into action. Did I get that right? Awesome. She grew up a three-sport high school athlete in small town Nebraska. So we've got a Midwest contingent going on here. Now an avid runner and cyclist, 9 marathons, including Boston and CIM, with a personal best of 250, which is speedy. And she is committed to maintaining these ideals of health and wellness for the next generation of athletes. So thank you for doing what you do and participating and leading the research project with Western States that we were a part of a couple weeks ago with Megan as well. And a long-winded way to ask the next question, which is, what does your personal rest and recovery plan look like with all of that background?
Thanks for the intro, Jonathan, and thanks for setting this conversation up. I think it's an important topic and really feeds into a lot of my work and life passions. And I just want to give a shout out to Megan too. We are sharing a lot of research projects that we're getting to work on and really dive into, especially with the female athlete program, and that's just getting started. I would say, as far as my own personal recovery plan, this has been an evolution and a lot of growth. I would say my first probably decade of running through high school and college and med school, I was uncoached and I would run probably 6 to 7 days a week and do the same type of run and just try and go hard and eliminate whatever stressors I was dealing with. And then
has anybody not done it that way?
It's true. I felt like it took me a lot longer to get to that point with all this understanding and knowledge that I was getting from school. But it wasn't until residency here at Stanford when I met Megan, and through Megan met her husband, David, who started to coach me, that I learned the value of the rest day and recovery and easy runs. And since that time, I feel like even when I'm not really in hard training, I will take a full day off of everything, maybe do some yoga. And it's always a good reason, especially with some of the stressors that aren't really related to training or exercise, that might be related to work projects. And that can be really good, positive stress, but it takes a lot of toll on my mind and body and just overall energy level. And so those days, even though sometimes I'm like, oh, I'm itching to get out, I try to commit to a day off, and I always feel like I benefit and I feel even more energized the next day. I feel like I sleep better that night and can get back and get after it the next day.
Very cool. Over to Megan. What does your personal rest and recovery plan look like, including rest day brags, of course?
Yes, the rest day brags right up there. Well, I echo, everything that Emily said. Also, Emily's my boss and one of my friends. And so it's just like, it's so awesome to get to share this conversation with Emily. We've gotten to work together over the last 7 years and it's been fantastic. I think for me, so one, rest days for sure. Actually, when I walked onto the track team at Duke, the coach asked me what type of training I was doing. And I was like, well, you see, I kind of like go out the door and then I just run hard and progressively harder and harder and harder. And I do that every day. And he looked at me like I had 10 heads. And so I think since I've evolved to quite a bit, hopefully as a coach, I have one structured rest day every day. I actually wear a heart rate monitor on my runs because historically I'm not great with like relative perceived exertion or RPE. I would say like, if I had to rate myself on most runs, it would be like a 3, which is pretty easy, when in reality, it's probably like an 8 or a 9. And so that's Yeah, a 12 helps hold me accountable. And then I think for me, the last point too is just sleep. So at baseline, I'm not a fantastic sleeper. Like I think I'm the type of person that goes to bed with like 8,000 thoughts swirling in my head. I'm doing like rhythmic gymnastics with like my mental energy, Simone Biles style. And I think for me, just like finding ways to relax and decompress and really prioritize that sleep time has been helpful as an athlete.
What are some of those ways that you decompress and wind down?
So I think for me, turning off the phone a half hour before bed has been really key. We actually have blackout shades in our room, which is awesome. We wrote them off, which is great too, because I feel like it's like a life and recovery hack that everyone should be able to write off. And then sometimes even like a warm bath or a warm cup of tea, I find really helps. And then magnesium and melatonin too have been really helpful.
Cool. The blackout shades are important because your bedtime is about 8 p.m., right?
Yes. So it ranges between 7:45 and 8:30 p.m. So very important in the summer.
I have stayed with the Roches for a week, and I can confirm that she is not making that up.
Yeah, but we do wake up at 4:30, so.
Very cool. Stephanie, same question. What does your personal rest and recovery plan look like with the new addition to the family? How has this changed?
Yeah, no, it's changed a lot. And Megan, I'm really jealous of your sleep schedule right now because mine is not like that. It's like if I get 5 to 6 hours, I'm like, ooh, good night. I will say though, I'll kind of push that aside because sleep isn't necessarily normal right now. But for me, I grew up cross country skiing, and I had a really great ski coach who taught us what rest and recovery was. So we always took a rest day on a Monday from like, I don't know, when I started skiing at 16. So that was just what I knew. And we trained by heart rate. So I think I'm fortunate that I had that background because I'm pretty good from a physical standpoint. The thing that I really focus on that's kind of unique is nutrition. And, thinking about getting good nutrients in, but just getting energy in on recovery and easy days. That's one place that runners often make the mistake is like on a rest day, it's like, oh, I'm not running, so I don't maybe need to think about food as much or maybe not eat as much food, but that's the day that you should go out for pizza and have ice cream, and because you're just catching up from all of those big days that you're just running a bit of an energy deficit. So for me, that's been kind of a game changer of like having just consistent good fueling on rest and recovery days.
Can you reiterate that with the context being, I get asked all the time on my own Instagram, and I don't have nutrition credentials, of people saying, do you eat less on rest days? Do you eat different on rest days? How would you answer that question?
I would say absolutely not. Because when you do big runs, like long runs, workouts, there is no way that you can compensate for how much you expend. When you go out for a 2-3+ hour run, your energy expenditure is through the roof. And that rest and recovery day is when you're able to catch back up and repair and recover so that you're able to keep training without going into a deficit and without being at risk of injury and illness. And so I don't eat any different. I follow my appetite and hunger cues. And I mean, I have a baby right now, but I also have ice cream hour every single night. Like it's not a joke. It's if I don't have my ice cream night or my ice cream hour before I go to bed, it's like, game over. I'm going to wake up hungry in the middle of the night. So I think it's really important as runners to recognize the energy expenditure and to really eat on your rest days.
So this is a professional runner and PhD in exercise physiology saying, eat more, and pizza and ice cream, thumbs up. I've shared pizza with Stephanie, and she makes a very good pizza. And definitely talks the talk when it comes to or walks the walk when it comes to nutrition. So just reiterating the point of continue eating even on the rest days. Andrew, same question. What does your personal rest and recovery plan look like?
Do we get an intermission where we get to eat? Because I'm pretty hungry.
Yeah, this is a good question.
Yeah, I think it is a fantastic question. I like how you phrase it too with rest and recovery. Talk about opening Pandora's box, talking about recovery to a group of runners and endurance athletes, right? And I think it's a lot of what I think it boils down to for me personally is simplifying the approach, because I think in a world of, products and things that are available as far as shortcutting recovery, I think it comes down to what are the fundamental principles that I think the past three have really nailed really well. I think, the core tenets being sleep, nutrition, and making sure your training approach is allowing you to even recover within the overall week to week. So I think just to give you a little more granular within that, I think first and foremost, if you're trying to find a way to shortcut recovery, I think it's a smart decision to take a step back and almost more of a bird's eye view to unpack what your week looks like. And so I think making sure that your training is set up in a way, kind of simplified in a sense, just making hard days hard, easy days easy, but allowing it to sort of blend in a way to where your strength work is dovetailing nicely with that training. So you're allowing yourself to actually get that recovery that you need. And I think that's really where it comes down to making it a sustainable approach as opposed to something where you're trying to make up for it. I totally echo what you're saying, Stephanie. We have just soon to be 2-year-old and second on the way. So I'm thinking like, man, a storm's coming, but obviously it's, what rich perspective to have a little one in the world. So we're kind of navigating that a little bit too. We have a pretty good sleeper, but I think sleep is something that is my personal goal this summer to really nail a little bit more, so to make sure I'm almost stacking up the bank account in a good way in the sleep bank account in that way. So I think personally it's making sure that I'm sticking to what I recommend for myself from a training approach to allow myself to keep my easy runs easy. Megan, you mentioned RPE, such a huge fan of allowing that intrinsic sort of subjective gauge to dictate how you're going to actually push. And in a world of metrics that are really helpful, but should be more of confirming rather than driving. I think that's a huge thing that I've noticed from my training as well, as far as keeping things easy when they're supposed to be, using data to confirm it, and finding ways to unplug on true rest days. And if it's an actual rest day, making sure it's the rest day.
Not just like a couple-hour bike ride.
Bingo. Yeah.
Very cool. I love the part about keeping easy days easy and hard days hard. I think it's the difference between the two is very important. All right, so we are on to an intro for Dr. Megan Roche here. Megan received her medical degree from Stanford as well. She is completing a PhD in epidemiology at Stanford, which is supremely relevant in today's day and age, with a focus on bone health in athletes and genetic predictors of sports injury. Megan is also a postdoctoral research fellow at the Stanford University Center on Longevity and is helping launch Stanford's Lifestyle, Health, and Performance program. Personally, she's a 5-time national trail running champion, North America mountain running champion, and a co-author of the book Happy Runner, which I highly suggest that everybody reads. She is a co-founder of Some Work All Play, a coaching group centered around finding long-term fulfillment in the process of running. And Megan completed her undergraduate degree in neuroscience at Duke University and competed in field hockey, cross country, track and field. Megan, the next question is for you. It's sort of dovetailing on what we've been talking about, but a bit more specific. How do you stay on top of your nutrition daily, which nowadays includes banana ice cream? Am I correct?
That is correct. Recently I've been switching to more of an anti-inflammatory based diet. And so banana ice cream is one of those things that is like kind of halfway in the middle. I'm all about like anti-inflammatory-ish and just keeping things, having some like moderation in there as well. I think for me, when I get really busy, I have a tendency to like DoorDash and to really like rely on eating out a lot. And so I think for me, the big thing is just having these like readily available foods and nutrients on board. And for me, that's often a big deal, like right in that 30-minute window after exercise. So I think for me, like really focusing on that window and getting in like a protein shake, granola, or like just something that's like a really fun snack in that period. And then also just making sure too, I think my husband, David, and I really emphasize with our athletes that like, hey, like food is fun and delicious. And really creating like fun social communities surrounding food. So like having friends over for dinner or going out to ice cream, and really reinforcing that with our athletes, just because like disordered eating is so prevalent in this community, and just like finding ways to help normalize that and talk about it, but also like reinforcing the idea that food is fun.
Love it. Stephanie, same question. How do you stay on top of your nutrition daily?
Yeah, I could talk about this for a long time. Nutrition is kind of my passion. I have a really good relationship with food, and so I've always been an intuitive eater. I eat when I'm hungry, I stop when I'm full, and I kind of eat and then I just don't think about it, right? So I think that oversimplifies it, because that's not the relationship a lot of people have with food. But for me, I do try to emphasize real foods. Like when I'm at home, I'm going to eat things that are, that aren't out of a package or out of a box. When I'm out of the house, I'm going to eat that stuff because it's easy, and there's room to have those foods when you emphasize real foods at home. So, I love to cook too. So it's also like, I love food, I love to cook. So I feel like it's not hard for me. But I think for most people, when I work with someone, I just try, like Megan said, to emphasize food and to take away the thoughts of calories and grams and really just talk about foods themselves and nourishing your body. Like eating things that make you feel good, that also taste good, and making it a really social thing, because having a meal should be enjoyable. It shouldn't be stressful. You shouldn't be thinking about calories and treating your body like a math equation, because it doesn't work like that. And just in case you're wondering, all of that information on the calories in a particular product, those have a plus or minus 10% error. So it's not accurate anyway. So if you're trying to like calculate things out, it's just not accurate. So just remove all of that stress and just start thinking about food and how to nourish your body, because I think that's the best way to get back to a healthy relationship.
Love it. Can you talk a little bit more about what intuitive eating means? I recently became aware of this term, and I was like, wow, this is putting a name to the way that I eat. And my understanding of intuitive eating is eating what your body needs and then listening to what you want from there, right? So I use InsideTracker. I know what my body needs. I know the micronutrients that are critical that I may be lacking, and then I fill it in with whatever else I want. So can you expand on what that means?
Yeah, so you described it pretty well, but it can be tough for people because intuitive eating takes some discipline, it takes some practice, and it's not something that you can just say, eat what your body needs or what you crave, because that comes back to what's your relationship with food. So when I'm trying to get someone to learn to eat more intuitive, I just have them think about, before they start to eat, like, how hungry are you? Scale 1 to 5, or it could be colors. I really like color other than numbers. So it's like, is it red? Are you yellow, green? How hungry are you? And then after, just how full are you? And you don't have to like write it down, but just think on that. And that just starts to draw awareness to how hungry you are, and then how full you are after eating a meal. So that's like the first step. And then the second step is just paying attention to how foods make you feel. And I don't want to say like follow your cravings, because there's like a big asterisk by that. Because like, of course, ice cream sounds delicious. I want to eat that right now. But listening to when you feel like, oh, I'm craving, I feel like my body needs, like for me the other day, I just really wanted chicken. And I eat mostly plant-based. And so when I crave or have this desire to eat something that's, like chicken or beef or whatever, I follow that, because I know that my body is craving that for some reason, and it allows me to get what I need. But it's hard to get to that point, to get to that trust. So I think start with small steps, and following your appetite and satiety cues is a good way to start dialing that in, and just thinking about it before and after meals. And that's how you start to get in tune with your body's regular, like it has all of these systems and redundancies to impact our appetite and satiety, and we can override them just by like the smell of chocolate chip cookies baking. Like you're full and then you smell them and it's like, oh, I want one of those. So just getting back to following those more internal appetite cues is probably the best way to start with intuitive eating. It's a long answer to your question.
Yes, perfect. No, it's exactly perfect. I think it's really important to reiterate listen to the cues that your body's giving you, right? If you're craving a burger, it's probably a reason that your body is craving a food that it knows will deliver iron, B12, things like that. The body is very smart on these types of things. From an evolutionary standpoint, it kind of has to be. Andrew, same question to you. How do you stay on top of your nutrition daily?
Have a registered dietitian in your corner.
Agreed.
I think, yeah, I mean, the amount of times I'm talking about nutrition to the registered dietitian at the sports medicine clinic that I'm at, almost hypothetically, in regards to maybe my own question, is startling. And I think a lot of that,
they should start to bill you probably, right?
Almost, you would think. So yeah, I think it's something where sort of feeling free to remove that barrier to seek out help from an expert, I think is a really, really key thing. And normalizing it, I think is a really, really healthy thing. Especially if you find yourself pushing for performance goals. I think it's a really helpful thing, because it creates a little bit of vulnerability, and it allows you to hold yourself accountable to yourself, and I think to somebody else who you trust. So that trust is definitely a big part of it. So I think, beyond that, I think a lot of what I'll try to do is I'll try to look back from sort of a historical perspective and unpack and almost reverse engineer, where have I run into issues historically, whether it's during maybe like a marathon build or something of that nature, or if it's specific foods that I've had issues with from a digestive standpoint, whatever, right? And I think for me, that allows me to sort of steer somewhat clear of some pitfalls. I'm definitely not perfect in this regard, and won't claim to be. But I think it's something where if I can start to carve out what are the guidelines, which I know having some blood work done with InsideTracker has really helped to sort of give me personally a little bit more of, I think, a lane to operate within. I think it really helps me to sort of have a guide of how to proceed with it. So knowing historically what's worked well, I think that's a really good exercise to do for yourself, because, and myself included, because I think it allows you to take what is my history, and to carry that forward as you look towards the future. More practically, I think it comes down to what are the points throughout my day from a nutrient timing perspective, so that I can add those variables in throughout my day. So for instance, let's say maybe for those of you that are morning runners, which maybe that's a vast majority, I know I'll lump myself in there too. It's, that 30-minute window right after a run, I definitely want to make sure to replenish, right? But I know for me, I'm going right into the clinic and treating for probably 3 to 4 hours right off the bat. So if you were to see my desk, it's this huge bag of the Costco almond deal, right? And so I think really, really giving yourself the opportunity to replenish in a hopefully an efficient way, so you don't find yourself in those pitfalls, and almost giving yourself a chance to succeed is really, really important. And I know a key thing for me. And so I think beyond that global approach of unpacking how overall the guideline overall works for you as an individual, I think protecting your run. It's a concept I know I find myself saying on repeat to individuals I'm working in a clinic setting or even a coaching capacity, especially on intensity days, right? Where if you can set yourself up well for those days where you're going to be working hard and then to subsequently recover from them, as Stephanie was alluding to earlier, I think that's really a good thing to protect those intensity, both in terms of higher intensity and more distance runs, right? So I think those are the big things I find myself coming back to. And trying to continue to learn about more.
Very cool. I particularly like the beginning of your answer, which is to say, talk to an expert. I think the fact is everybody eats, and the dangerous part of this is that everybody thinks that they're an expert as a result, because it's something that they do 25 to 35 times a week. But there's a reason that you have to go to school and learn about nutrition in order to give nutritional advice. So thank you for mentioning that. Emily, same question to you. How do you stay on top of your nutrition?
Well, everyone made really good, great comments. And so I echo that. And +1, I like Megan's +1 approach. I would say, one, I don't like to follow any strict rules when it comes to nutrition and diet. I think it's important for me to, if I'm craving a certain food, ice cream, pizza, burgers, wine, that I allow myself to eat that food. And Jonathan, I think you kind of nailed it, that maybe if your body is telling you, or if you have those cravings, there's probably a reason. And I think it's important to kind of to listen to that, especially I think it takes time to kind of develop that healthy relationship. And I will say that a lot of the athletes that are coming into my clinic are not at that level yet. And so for them, it's not natural for them to think about fueling and refueling, and they may be skipping breakfast before their morning runs. They may not be refueling like they should. They may be having a very simple basic snack, but it's not enough, it's not complete, and it's not really checking those important boxes that they need to fully recover and get them energized for the day and allow that good energy balance to take place. And so I think that's an important aspect, is that maybe for me, when I educate my athletes, and I'm working really closely with a sports dietitian, so I'm sure I really want to reinforce the importance of kind of seeking out the right resources. We're talking about really ways to make that a habit and make that something that they want to do. They want to fuel their body, and sometimes using the term fuel as opposed to food, and avoiding any discussion of calories, like Stephanie had mentioned, is an important piece of that. And another big trick for me is I am full of nutrient-dense snacks throughout the day. And I pack them. I have a snack stash at work that's free for all of my clinic staff. So if anybody's hungry, hopefully they don't have those highs and lows throughout the day. And I think, as Andrew had mentioned, and people have different timing of their training, and they train at different times of the day. And so sometimes it's a joy to be able to sneak out midday, but I think being able to plan the nutrition just as much as you plan that training is super important, and should be calculated in and part of that program. So that's my long-winded, all over answer about my nutrition plan.
Very cool. So the final intro is Dr. Stephanie Howe. She's a professional trail and ultra runner from San Rafael, California. She loves spending most of her day outdoors, preferably in the mountains, with her dog Soren, who's very cute. Stephanie is a new mom to baby boy Julian, who is also very cute, born in December of 2020. He is already learning to love the outdoors, surprise, surprise, while visiting nearby trails, peaks, and beaches. Professionally, Stephanie has a PhD in nutrition and exercise physiology, and owns a nutrition business centered on healthy, sustainable nutrition for health and performance. Competitively, Stephanie has won races including Western States 100 and Lake Sonoma 50, and has podium finishes at many other competitive ultra races. She's passionate about the outdoors and protecting our earth and winters, and is an active member of Protect Our Winters, where she turns her love for the outdoors into policy. Stephanie, thank you for all that you do. And the question to you is, what is the toughest injury that you have faced as a runner, and how did you overcome that adversity?
Well, thanks for that introduction. That was quite amazing. I've had my fair share of injuries, and just to, I guess, bring everyone up to speed, I've had 2 Achilles surgeries, which are not fun, and they're not small. And then I've also just recently, I have a 7-month-old now, so that's not really an injury, but that has been a really interesting process of going from not being able to run to return to run and having zero control over my body. So yeah, I've learned a lot over the years. And ask that question again. What did you want me to?
So the second part of that question is, how did you overcome that adversity?
Okay. Overcoming the adversity. So I've learned that you have to meet your body where it's at. So nobody likes to be injured. Nobody likes to take time off. But when you just move through the stages of grief and get to acceptance and just take a deep breath and know that, trust that it will get better, I feel like that's such a better way than trying to fight your way through it. I've fought my way through it. I've tried to cross train. I've tried to stay fit. And that just results in a lot of frustration and burning mental energy, so that when you are able to get back to running, you're just like exhausted by the whole process of like going to the gym and getting on the ski ergometer, or, getting on the rowing machine, or the whatever it is. So when I am injured, I just find a way that I can hopefully move and feel good in a safe way. And this has been interesting for me, because after giving birth, there was not really a way to move. So I found, for me, it was just to go outside and like be in nature, just sit in nature and just breathe and observe it. And I know that's not like running or movement that we're used to, but that was a way for me to still connect and like get in, like my introvert head, like that's spinning all around, to like have that time alone. So I think with injuries, I've learned that you just really can't force them to get better quicker. And the less you do, the better. And I know that's probably going to be contradictory to what a lot of advice is, but I find most of the time we seek out the answer that we want to hear. Like, just do this. Like, you can go swim 1,000,000 miles a week.
Train
Like,
through
don't
it.
run. And I just don't think that lets you heal as quickly and maybe address some of the underlying issues of why these injuries happened in the first place. So that's my biggest piece of advice that's kind of taken a lot of growth to get to, is just like, take a deep breath, let it go for a little bit, and your body wants to heal itself. And so just give it the time, give it the resources, including sleep and nutrition, and it will improve.
Totally agree. For more on injury recovery and prevention, you can tune into the podcast episode that Stephanie and I did on my podcast, For the Long Run, episode 13, from way back in the archives, where we talked about exactly this for about an hour. In the spirit of moving through as many questions as we can today, going forward, we're going to go with one question per person as we go around the horn here. With that being said, feel free to chime in. This isn't just a one-on-one. It's all of you contributing your individual insights to the group. So less of a Q&A at this point and more of a discussion. So from there, we're going to go to Andrew and ask, what is the most common running injury that you see in your clinic?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say the common themes that emerge from those kind of seeking out consultation and help, I would say it's likely patellar tendinopathy is probably one of the most common things that I'll see come through. And I think when you unpack a lot of where the forces go from a running performance, I guess the performance demands of running perspective, a lot of times that's what individuals who are maybe getting into the sport or find themselves pushing for more mileage or performance goals. That's a very common one that I'll see as patellar tendinopathy. That being said, it's essentially I'll see kind of from the foot up to kind of the waist area for sure. So foot and ankle, knee and hip for sure are common themes, but patellar tendinopathy is probably one of the most common ones that I'll see.
Got it. We have a very topical question coming up for Emily here. What are your top 5 tips for minimizing injury risk factors? Asking Emily because she does quite a lot of research on risk factors.
Oh, such a good question. And kind of getting deep into the science weeds, I think we could probably have a whole discussion panel just on injury risk reduction. I would say to kind of carry on this theme of nutrition, I think really making sure that an athlete stays on top of nutrition and not getting too detailed into the macro and micronutrients, but really just overall nutritional intake. And especially as training starts to increase, making sure that the energy, the nutritional intake matches that. And that can really, especially when we talk about bone health and bone stress injury risk, I think it's a really important topic to really hit home on with athletes and with runners. And so Megan and I are doing a lot of work studying and educating athletes on female athlete triad and relative energy deficiency in sport. And so quickly, the triad is for female athletes, it's low energy availability, so underfueling or undertraining or a combination of both, leading to hormonal suppression, causing irregular periods or some degree of hormonal imbalances, often from missed periods, and then that affecting overall bone health, which can then lead to increased stress fracture or bone stress injury risk. And then kind of expanding on that is relative energy deficiency in sport, which encompasses both male and female athletes and kind of talks about all these other physiological effects both on health and performance. So I think that tip really is a big one that needs to be magnified for me as far as important kind of, and the research is out there as far as it reducing overall injury risk. And then, did you ask for 5? Or
if you've been counting, great job.
I think the other big one is strength training, because I would love to hear Andrew's opinion on this too, as far as the importance of strength training and maybe the underappreciation of strength training with some endurance athletes and endurance runners. And I think it's as far as the research goes, there aren't a lot of like studies looking at athletes and prescribing strength training and having it actually reduce injury risk. However, there has been research on improving performance, and it doesn't harm an athlete. And I think having that information in mind and understanding that this could improve performance, and maybe when well-designed studies do take place, this could actually reduce their overall injury risk. I think it's super important. And when an athlete is injured, strength training is going to be prescribed. And I'm sure Andrew is doing some degree of patellar tendon loading type protocols for the those knee injuries pretty frequently. So I would say strength is a big another tip. And then thinking about kind of biomechanics too, as far as factoring that in and how an athlete lands, and thinking about those potentially as factors to reduce overall injury risk. And I think about injuries as kind of a part of the bucket, and we all have a different threshold with that bucket. And we think about kind of nutritional impairments and really making sure that that is optimized, thinking about biomechanics, thinking about strength. And if there are things such as a really low cadence or some muscle asymmetries from side to side, all those can potentially contribute to the bucket and increase that athlete's potential risk and kind of tip them over that threshold. So those are important parts. And kind of circling back to those micro and macronutrients that we were talking about with the nutrition, kind of talking about InsideTracker and some of the information that an athlete can get from that information and that profile, whether it's vitamin D, whether it's overall iron levels, all those I think are contributing to the bucket as far as if those are suboptimal, it's potentially kind of adding to that athlete's overall risk. So I take an individual approach. So it kind of depends on kind of the sport that they're, or the distance that they're doing and the age, and then whether they're male or female, but those are some of the big heavy hitters as far as risk reduction tips that I recommend.
Very cool. We talked a bit about strength training in there, and you were curious about Andrew's take, and I'm curious as well. So first I want to ask Andrew and then Stephanie the same question as given your background as well. So Andrew, what's your take on strength training as an athlete?
When's part 2 for this Zoom call? Because I think we just
we have an hour. Yeah.
let's roll. I'm like, man, even off air, it's be fun to talk through.
Your 45-second answer.
Oh man. Okay. So no, I think it's immensely important while underrepresented in the research. Every time a new paper sort of comes out, I'm really antsy to dig in. And, when I get in sort of a tight-knit community with those that I feel have a good grasp on what it truly means to perform strength training for runners in a running capacity, it seems like a lot of the papers fall short due to a true lack of a concrete universal definition of what strength training is. And so, you mentioned bone health, right? What a potential upside for individuals, especially younger individuals who are getting into the sport. They're the opportunities that are very, very ripe. As far as later on, as we kind of age into, kind of the more adulthood and master's level athlete level, which I think I'm rapidly approaching, because what do they say? 35 is a master's level athlete these days. I think it's something where when we boil down what the performance demands of runners entails and sort of asks of us, it's a lot of tendon related load. Tendon specifically, and also from a bony standpoint. And so I think to unpack that further, we have to look at time of season that we're in. And again, we talk about dovetailing, right? And how your training should really coincide with the phase of training that you're in. If we're in an off-season mode, this is going to be an ideal time to really push the envelope with strength. And we're talking probably above 75% one rep max with some big lifts. I think single leg is a really important facet of that too, but not being afraid to get underneath the barbell a little bit. Of course, with correct and safe form, if you have questions on that, definitely, again, seek out help. But not being afraid to challenge yourself from a loading standpoint is so crucial. And then, of course, as we get into ramp-up phases, keeping and maintaining some of those loads to where it's not an unfamiliar load or an underprepared load that you're dosing yourself with. I think that's the really common theme. there is some pretty airtight literature showing that we can maintain some of those strength gains that we develop and work so hard towards in an off season, making sure that we can get at a minimum, if we're looking to progress, a couple days of strength training. But if we're in a peak phase of training, we can maintain gains with one heavier day per week of strength training. And so I think, again, it really promotes this intrinsic audit of our training load to sort of see, am I checking the boxes? And also, am I tolerating this load okay? And how does it blend within my week? So, yeah, I think there's been papers that have been done. Thinking of I want to say the Larson paper, I can't remember the exact year, where it sort of gets thrown around very loosely as far as, reduces the risk of maybe 50%, but it's not specific to runners. And there's been other papers that have really tried to emulate that as well. And they don't seem to get the strength training approach quite right, which is really dizzying to me, which I'm sure you guys in the research field are sort of like, I'm going to take it into my own hands and just do this research, right? So I think there's a lot of upside and potential opportunity for demonstrating the exact role with it. Bone health is a little more clear, right? I think Rich Willie has done a really good job of really demonstrating how plyometrics and strength can really implement, and when implemented in a sensible way, can really move the needle in that direction, as well as your guys' work too. So I think it really comes down to, what are the loads of running from a performance standpoint? How do we unpack those loads, and then how do we implement them from an annual training cycle perspective?
Very cool. Stephanie, I want your perspective here as an athlete versus a credentialed coach. When you're in a period of heavy training, what does it look like from an accessory standpoint for you when talking about things besides running?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I'm glad you clarified how you wanted me to ask or answer this question. So I will just echo with what Andrew said of like, the strength training is really important, but built into a plan of like, with enough rest and recovery. Don't just add it in on top of everything else. So I think that's important. So for me, when I'm in a
you can't just add more work and expect better results.
No, you can't just add more work. It doesn't work. I'd rather, okay, this is the coach hat. I'd rather have an athlete skip an easy 60-minute run and do strength training than to not do any strength training or to try to shove it in somewhere else. So
instead of sleeping an extra hour.
Yeah, right. Okay, so back to my athlete standpoint. I like to do things that move my body in a way that are a little bit non-impact. And so a lot of that, it can be like right now, a lot of yoga, but not yoga, like going to the yoga class and doing a 60-minute vinyasa flow class. That to me is another workout. I don't need another workout. So I like to do just dynamic movements to keep my body feeling fluid. I use an app called Athletes for Yoga that has like 5-10-minute videos that you can just do different areas of your body. So I'll just kind of like do that when I can. With my schedule right now, it's really like I get a window and I'm like, go, like you have to go. So it's just like really sporadic, but I try to make that a priority of like doing things, not just doing a long run and then just like laying on the couch, which that doesn't happen anymore, but like taking care of Julian or just like moving about my day. I try to like do those little things. For me, it's my feet. My feet are super rigid. So if I just like put a lacrosse ball under them, or I do like the 5-minute foot reset when I'm, just playing with Julian or reading him a book or something, those things go really far for me in terms of like, keeping my body feeling good. And then nutrition, of course. I mean, I don't have time to like dive totally into that of like, I just think food
That'll
is
be the next question for you.
Okay. Yeah. Eat the food, all of it.
Eat the food. So what we're hearing here is do the things that work for you and get the things into your routine that don't disrupt the main goal, while also making sure that Soren right behind you is having a great time himself.
Well, he's injured right now. If you see the cone on his head, yeah. he has a foot injury, so he's resting.
He wasn't doing his deadlifts.
Yeah, poor guy.
So the next question is for Megan. What is your advice to other runners who may be struggling to recover from injuries, or perhaps in a sustained injury period?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think for me, injuries are about avoiding the second and third injury. So I think, you get one injury, and then I think it's really important to take this like holistic return back where you're both identifying what may have gone wrong in the first place, but then also being really cautious, because I've seen some athletes, it's like, you get one injury and then you get so excited to return back to running that you end up getting a second injury and then a third injury. And that's really the spiral that you want to avoid, because honestly, as athletes, like, injuries will be inevitable. Like, you're going to go out there and shoot your shot in a race. Like, you may sprain your ankle. Like, if you compete long enough in sport, unless you're like some sort of genetic freak, injuries are inevitable. And so I think like also giving yourself grace in the process too, and understanding like, hey, like, let's do a deep dive and understand why this is happening, but this is also not my fault. And so I think InsideTracker is great for that, because athletes can turn to InsideTracker and look at like, okay, what are my vitamin D levels? What are my magnesium levels? And then layering that in and kind of having this like this trajectory that you can track over time. And then final point on that too is life stress. So I see oftentimes athletes just get really overloaded with life stress, and it could be something small that just like magnifies and maybe causes like a loss of sleep for a bit. And even that can kind of like tip the scale of injury. And so just taking this like big holistic picture and big holistic look at everything, and working with a friend, a coach, a doctor, a PT, someone who's an expert in that process can be really
somebody
helpful.
on this panel.
Yeah, maybe. Yes. I would hire anyone on this panel. I love what I'm hearing.
Very cool. So an important point to reiterate there is that injuries do happen. And I went through a pretty frustrating bilateral stress reaction in 2020. And David basically said, great, that means we were exploring the limits. And so an injury is an opportunity to take some time off, but also take it as a data point of, this is your body's threshold. And at the time, the blood work kind of confirmed that I was right around that threshold, but we were, pushing on and seeing what we could get out of some pretty high training. So I think it's important to recognize that you didn't do anything wrong, or you shouldn't be ashamed of being injured, right? Professional athletes get injured all the time. You heard Stephanie say she had 2 Achilles surgeries. And it just means that we're out there doing what we love, and perhaps did a little bit much, but we can adjust going forward. So Stephanie, question for you. Originally the question was, what supplements do you and your athletes prioritize to help with injury prevention? But I'm going to modify that question to say, what micronutrients do you and your athletes prioritize to help with injury prevention?
Yeah, that's a much better way to put it for me, because I take a food forward approach, and supplements have their time and place, but only when there's like a deficiency. I don't recommend that people just proactively take a multivitamin or just, take iron unless they have a deficiency. So one of the first things, and again, this with an asterisk that it's so individual, right? So when I start to work with someone, I like to have them use InsideTracker to get a panel so that we have data points to work off of and look at like, okay, where are you low? But for most athletes, one of the first nutrients we talk about is vitamin D, because that is a super important micronutrient, and it's tough to get. The best way we get it is through the sunlight, which, for some of the year, great, we're going to be out and we're going to get enough vitamin D, but otherwise it's in obscure food sources. So that's one that I usually have people test regularly. And I do recommend a supplement for it, just because it is so hard to get through food. So that's kind of one of the first ones. The second one I have a lot of discussions around is iron. And because we know iron is what binds oxygen to the red blood cells. So when you're running or biking or whatever, you need to bring the oxygen to the working muscles. If you don't have enough iron, you're going to feel fatigued. So think about like running up a flight of stairs and just being out of breath. That's like what it feels like when you're low iron, just to go out for an easy run. So super important for endurance athletes. And females tend to be low compared to males, just because we lose blood every month in the menstrual cycle. And so it's one that is usually, if there is something that's low, iron tends to be low. And it's a little bit different if it's hemoglobin versus ferritin, the way that I like to work with it. But starting with food first. And if it is someone who is open to eating animal sources, really getting red meat is the most efficient way to get iron and bump up hemoglobin. And if not, there's plenty of plant-based sources, and it just has to be really like nutrition has to be very thought through. So pairing the iron intake with vitamin C, which helps with absorption, and avoiding calcium, which competes for absorption. So I'm really getting into the weeds with this, but the third one I really look at is vitamin B. B12, B6, because that one tends to be low sometimes in not just plant-based athletes, but people who eat a really, I hate to use the word healthy diet, but people who eat a lot of fruits and vegetables and whole grains, they just tend to be lower in energy density. So it's easier to get behind in some of those micronutrients, especially the B vitamins. So with that one, I like to recommend food and talking about different foods that contain the B vitamins, because I think it's one of those that's a little bit better absorbed by food rather than just a supplement. So those are the big three. And then there's so many other ones. There's so many, but it really just depends on the person. And that's why it's good to have, markers on yourself and use yourself as an N of 1 and track over time, because you might find that your patterns vary during different times of the year, like potentially in a high volume, like the summer, you're out running all the time, you might get low in a certain nutrient. And in the winter, you have no problem with that. So when you know your tendencies and patterns, you can kind of be a better, like meet your body and give your body what it needs a little bit better.
Amazing. Thank you so much for that. I could talk with you all for hours, and with many of you I have about all this. Before we wrap up, thank you everyone for tuning in. Thank you to our experts for sharing their wisdom for this hour here and doing what they do on a regular basis. The replay of this will be on the InsideTracker Instagram. It will be on YouTube tomorrow, which is Thursday. And we will be sending an email link later this week as well. For anyone tuning in, they can use the code Injury Prevention for 25% off and free InnerAge on any of our plans. And before we wrap, I just want to go around and can each person say where we can find you on social if we want to follow along with you or potentially reach out to work with you. So we'll start with Stephanie and go backwards this time.
Yeah, my Instagram is Stephanie Marie Howe, and I have a website, StephanieMarieHowe.com, and I am both doing nutrition and coaching and taking on new athletes right now. So I would love to work with anyone who's interested.
Thank you, Stephanie. Megan?
Yeah, my Instagram handle is MegRunsHappy. More importantly, my dog has an Instagram, Addie Does Stuff, which also doubles as my husband and my coach. And then we have a coaching platform, SwapRunning.com, and a podcast too, where we talk about a lot of these topics.
Thank you so much. Emily?
Yeah, so Instagram is Emily Kraus, MD. I also am still working on more of a sports science Instagram with Emily Kraus, MD _sports science. And then if you want to see me in clinic, I can sometimes set up some telehealths. Out of state is a little more difficult now that COVID is we used to be able to do a lot more out of state consultations, but it's getting a little more sticky, but we can at least have that conversation. And you can find me at emilycrossmd.com.
Andrew?
Yeah, Insta is the way to go for me. So my handle is dr.drew.dpt. It's dr.drew.dpt. Yeah, happy to have a conversation if anybody's looking to sharpen approach and whatnot. I also manage a running community on Facebook called the Strong Runners Group, which is kind of a little bit more of a community approach to what it means to unpack some of these variables.
Awesome. Thank you, everyone, so much.